the kind of silence that feels like a warning. Most people think hunting is only about tracking an animal, finding the right moment and taking the shot. But in the toughest wild places on Earth, hunting becomes something else. It becomes a fight with fear, a fight with weather, a fight with pain, and sometimes a fight to stay alive. That is what makes these stories so powerful. They are not just about the hunt. They are about people who walked into places so harsh, so lonely, and so dangerous that one bad choice could have been the last choice they ever made. And if you stay with me until the end, I will share the story that many people say is the most terrifying of them all. The kind of story that proves the wild does not care how ready you think you are. There is a reason the deepest forests, the highest mountains, the coldest snowfields, and the darkest swamps still pull people in. These places are hard, they are rough, they are unforgiving, but they also feel real in a way that normal life does not. Out there is no soft comfort, no easy escape, no quick help. Every sound matters, every step matters, every choice matters. A person who enters that world knows one thing before the hunt even begins. The land itself is already the first enemy. Long before an animal is spotted, the hunter is already facing cold wind, weak light, rough ground, hunger, heavy gear, and the strange pressure that comes from being completely alone. That is why real hunting stories from brutal wild locations stay in people's minds. They show what happens when confidence meets raw nature, and nature does not always lose. Many people who have never been far into the wild imagine it as something simple. They picture tall trees, fresh air, maybe a little danger, and then a clean return home. But the truth is much harder than that. The real wild can wear a person down slowly. It starts small. Your boots get wet. The cold reaches your socks. Your hands begin to ache. The path behind you starts to look different than it did before. A sound comes from somewhere you did not expect. The daylight seems to move faster than it should. Then the mind starts changing too. You begin to think harder about every movement. You stop more often. You listen longer. You look over your shoulder for no clear reason. That is how fear works in places like these. It does not always crash into you all at once. Sometimes it slips in quietly, little by little, until you suddenly realize your heart has been beating too fast for the last 10 minutes. What makes hunting in these places so intense is not just the animals, it is everything around them. A frozen valley can trap a man faster than any predator. A mountain can break a body with one loose rock. A swamp can steal energy step by step until even walking becomes a struggle. A deep forest can confuse the senses until north feels like south, and the way home feels farther with every step. In those moments, a person learns something important. The wild is never just a background. It is active. It is alive. It is part of the story. Sometimes it is the main story. That is why these first moments matter so much. Before any hunter meets danger face to face, the land begins to test him. It watches how he moves. It tests his patience. It tests his pride. It tests whether he respects where he is or thinks he can control it. That is the thing many people do not understand. The toughest wild places do not care how strong someone looks. They do not care how many stories he has told before. They do not care how expensive his gear is or how calm he sounded back at camp. Out there, the rules are old and simple. If you are careless, you suffer. If you rush, you make mistakes. If you ignore signs, you may not get a second chance. Hunters who spend time in these places know that the biggest danger is often not the animal they are tracking. It is the belief that they are in charge. The moment someone feels too sure, the wild often reminds him how small he really is. Picture a man stepping into a dark tree line before sunrise. The air is sharp and cold. His breath leaves pale clouds in front of his face. Under his boots, the ground is hard and uneven. He has been thinking about this trip for weeks. He checked his gear. He studied the area. He planned his route. He told himself he was ready. But once the world behind him disappears and the forest closes around him, something changes. He feels it at once. The road is gone. The last safe sound is gone. Even the shape of the morning looks different out there. Everything becomes darker, deeper, and more uncertain. He keeps moving because that is what he came to do. But now the hunt has truly started, and not in the way he expected. This is where real hunting stories begin to separate themselves from simple outdoor tales. These are not stories about comfort. They are not stories about easy wins. They are stories about what happens when people push into places where the land can turn against them without warning. One minute the weather is clear. The next minute the wind changes and cuts through every layer. One minute the path seems obvious. The next minute snow, mud, or darkness erases it. One minute a person feels strong. The next minute hunger, pain, or exhaustion begins to cloud his thinking. Those changes are what make the toughest wild locations so dangerous. They can turn confidence into doubt in a matter of minutes. And still, people go. They go because there is something in human nature that wants the test. Some hunters go because it is part of their family tradition. Some go because they want food. Some go because they want peace. Some go because the hard places call to them. There is a strange pull in the kind of silence you only find deep in the wilderness. There is a feeling in standing alone under a huge sky with nothing around you but earth, wind, and distance. It can feel honest. It can feel clean. It can feel powerful. But it can also become dangerous very fast. The same silence that feels beautiful in one moment can feel terrifying in the next. The same distance that feels freeing at dawn can feel hopeless by nightfall. That is why these stories matter. They show what people are like when all the easy parts of life fall away. No warm house, no traffic, no lights, no quick phone call, no crowd nearby. Just a human being in a place that has not changed its rules for anyone. In that kind of setting, a person becomes very honest. Fear becomes honest. Courage becomes honest. Mistakes become honest. You cannot hide from yourself in the deep wild. If you panic, you feel it. If you are strong, you prove it. If you are careless, the land will expose it. The wild strips things down to what is real. Some of the hardest hunting stories begin with a simple goal and end as survival stories. A man goes out to track deer and ends up fighting freezing rain. Another follows fresh signs across a ridge and finds himself trapped by darkness on steep ground. Someone crosses marshland thinking it will only take an hour, then spends half the day dragging himself through sucking mud and cold water. Another hears movement in the brush and realizes too late that he is not alone in predator country. These are the moments that stay with people for life. Not because they are dramatic in a movie way, but because they are real. Real fear, real danger, real consequences. Out there, a person cannot press pause and step out of the story. He is inside it until he finds a way back. And that is what makes the first section of this journey so important. Before we get to the hardest moments, before we get to the close calls and brutal nights and shocking turns, we need to understand the world these people stepped into. We need to feel the weight of that world. Because once you understand what these locations are really like, every story hits harder. A steep ridge is no longer just a ridge. It becomes a place where one slip can change everything. A frozen lake is no longer just ice. It becomes a thin line between confidence and disaster. A stand of trees is no longer just a forest. It becomes a maze where sound travels strangely and direction begins to break apart. The wild has many faces, and all of them can be cruel. In some places, the cold is the danger. It enters slowly. First your fingers hurt, then they go numb. Your jaw tightens, your toes lose feeling. Small tasks become hard. Simple moves take more effort. You tell yourself you are fine, but your body is already spending energy faster than you know. In other places, the danger is heat and distance. The sun drains strength, water runs low. Every mile feels longer than it looked on a map. Then there are places where the ground itself becomes the enemy. Rocks shift, wet roots slide, mud grabs your boots. Sharp drops appear where the land looked smooth from afar. The wild does not attack in only one way. It uses whatever it has. And there is another danger that does not get talked about enough. The mind. When a person is far from help and deep in a place that feels empty, the mind starts doing strange things. It listens too hard. It imagines movement. It repeats bad thoughts. It makes time feel slow. It can turn one wrong sound into 10 terrible ideas. Hunters who know the wild well understand this. They know that panic is a threat. They know that fear must be managed before it grows larger than the problem itself. But knowing that and doing that are not the same thing. It is easy to sound calm when telling stories later. It is much harder to stay calm when the light is fading, the wind is rising, and the path back no longer looks familiar. Imagine walking through a dense forest in the late afternoon. The light is already starting to fall. It slips through the trees in thin gray lines. The deeper you go, the darker it gets. At first, the woods feel normal. Then little things begin to stand out. The birds stop calling. The branches no longer move. Even your own footsteps sound too loud. You stop to listen, and the silence presses back at you. That is a feeling many people never forget. It is not the same as being alone in a quiet room. It is the feeling that the whole world around you is holding its breath. Hunters talk about that feeling in many different places. Deep woods, snowfields, river valleys, high ridges. It comes in many settings, but it means the same thing. Something has changed. Sometimes that change is natural. A storm is coming. A larger animal is near. The weather is turning. Dusk is falling faster than expected. Other times the change is in the hunter. He is more tired than he realizes. He has drifted off course. He is colder than he should be. He is starting to feel the edge of fear. This is what makes the toughest wild locations so powerful in story after story. They do not just challenge the body, they challenge judgment. A hunter can be skilled, prepared, and tough, yet still be pushed into a bad decision by hunger, fatigue, or fear. In the wild, the line between a smart move and a dangerous one can become very thin. That is why respect matters so much. The people who survive hard wilderness do not usually survive because they are fearless. They survive because they pay attention. They notice the sky. They check the ground. They respect time. They respect weather. They respect distance. They know that pride can be deadly. They understand that the land is stronger than they are. That respect shows up in every great hunting survival story. The moment a person stops treating the wild like a challenge and starts treating it like a force, he begins to think more clearly. He becomes slower in the right way, more careful, more alert, more honest about danger. Still, no amount of respect removes risk. That is the truth at the heart of these stories. A hunter may do many things right and still find himself in trouble. Snow can arrive early. Fog can move in fast. A branch can break underfoot. An animal can appear from the wrong side. A river crossing can go bad. A compass can be forgotten. A boot can tear. A hand can slip. In the toughest locations, many dangers are small at first. That is what makes them so dangerous. A wet sleeve does not seem like a crisis until the temperature drops. A missed turn does not feel serious until darkness settles in. A little pain in the ankle does not seem like much until the ridge ahead demands perfect balance. And that is why these stories stay alive. They remind people that survival is often not about one huge heroic moment. It is about many small choices. Do you turn back early or push farther? Do you stop and rest or keep moving? Do you admit you are off course or keep pretending you know the way? Do you listen to the strange feeling in your chest or ignore it? In the deep wild, those small choices can become life-changing. That is the part many people on the outside miss. They think the drama comes from one big event. But often the real story is built from 10 little moments that slowly close around a person like a trap. Think about the sound of boots in snow before dawn. The air is so cold it bites the inside of your nose. Your breath feels thin. Each step makes a dull crunch. The world around you is white, gray, and silent. There is beauty in it, yes, but there is also danger in every mile. If you stop too long, your body cools. If you sweat too much, your layers become a problem later. If you misjudge the ground, you may sink deeper than expected. If the sky turns and the wind rises, even returning to camp can become a test. Now think about a swamp by contrast. Wet grass, dark water, insects, thick air, mud pulling at every step. It is a completely different world, yet the truth is the same. The land is always asking a question. Are you ready for me? Or did you only think you were? The toughest hunting locations also create another feeling that city life rarely gives people anymore: vulnerability. Real vulnerability. The kind that enters your body and changes the way you breathe.
In modern life, most people are never far from help. There is almost always a road, a building, a phone, a light, another person. But not in the deep wild. In the deep wild, you may be hours away from aid, maybe farther. That fact changes everything. A normal cut becomes serious. A fall becomes serious. Bad weather becomes serious. Getting turned around becomes serious. When help is far away, even ordinary problems begin to carry a different weight. That weight is what makes every decision feel heavier. There is also the animal side of the story, of course. Hunting is never only about the land. It is about tracking living creatures that know the terrain better than any human ever will. The animal is not reading a map. It is not guessing at the slope. It does not question the wind. It belongs there. The hunter does not. That truth matters. It means the human enters with less natural advantage than he often likes to admit. He must read signs, study movement, watch the air, and move with patience. In some places, the animal is cautious. In some places, it is aggressive. In some places, it is not even the hunted animal that becomes the danger. A bear may smell food. Wolves may shadow movement. Wild boar may burst from cover. A moose may charge. The wild does not promise that danger will arrive in the shape you expected. That is one reason the best hunting stories feel bigger than the act of hunting itself. They become stories about awareness, about instinct, about knowing when to stay still and when to move, about hearing a sound and understanding whether it means life, danger, or nothing at all. In the deep wild, small clues become everything. A fresh track in mud, a branch snapped at the wrong height, a sudden gust of wind from behind, a strange scent in the air, silence where there should be noise. Hunters who last in harsh places learn to read these signs almost like a second language. But even then, they still face moments when the land gives them too much to read at once. The deeper a person goes into the wilderness, the more strange time begins to feel. At camp, an hour passes quickly. On a hard trail in bad weather, 10 minutes can feel like forever. A short distance on the map becomes a long battle on the ground. The mind plays tricks. Dusk seems to drop faster than expected. Dawn feels too far away. The body starts measuring things differently. Water matters more. Dry socks matter more. Fire matters more. Direction matters more. Those are the details that shape real survival stories. And they matter here because the first section is where the pressure starts building. This is the part where a person steps from ordinary space into a world where the rules are harder and the consequences are sharper. Let's talk about fear, because fear lives inside all of these stories. Not movie fear, not loud fear, real fear. The kind that does not always make a person scream. Sometimes it just makes him stop walking. Sometimes it makes him listen too hard. Sometimes it makes him stare at a tree line and feel that something is wrong before he understands why. Fear in the wild is often quiet. It is cold. It sits in the stomach. It narrows attention. It changes breathing. It makes even a strong person feel very small. But fear is not always the enemy. Sometimes fear is the signal that saves a life. Fear can tell you to stop before you go farther onto bad ice. Fear can tell you to turn back before darkness traps you. Fear can tell you that the brush ahead holds more than wind. The hunters in these stories are not memorable because they felt no fear. They are memorable because they kept thinking while fear was present. That matters. Courage is not the lack of fear. Courage is movement in spite of it, caution in spite of it, clear choice in spite of it. In the hardest wild locations, courage often looks very simple. It looks like checking your route again. It looks like backing away from bad ground. It looks like choosing warmth over pride. It looks like moving carefully when your body wants to rush. It looks like admitting that the day has changed and the plan must change too. That kind of courage is not flashy, but it saves lives. So when we speak about real hunting stories from brutal places, we are really speaking about people placed under pressure. We are speaking about men who left the normal world behind and stepped into terrain that tested them physically and mentally. Some came back with stories they could barely tell. Some came back with a new respect for the land.
Some came back shaken. Some came back grateful. And in every one of those stories, there is a moment where the person realizes this is no longer just a hunt. This is now a battle against conditions, against time, against uncertainty, and against whatever waits beyond the next ridge, beyond the next stand of trees, beyond the next hour of failing light.
Maybe the strongest image in all these stories is the moment when the hunter looks around and feels how alone he truly is. That moment can happen at noon or near dark. It can happen in snow, fog, rain, or heat. It can happen with an animal nearby or with no animal in sight at all. It comes when the distance behind him feels large and the space ahead feels larger. He becomes aware of the simple fact that nobody else is there to solve this moment for him. Nobody else is there to hear that sound. Nobody else is there to see that track, that storm, that change in light, that broken path, that movement in the brush. It is only him and the wild has more patience. That feeling is why these stories hold so much power for viewers, especially for people who have never stood in a place like that. It reminds us how thin comfort really is. It reminds us how quickly safety can disappear when familiar things fall away. It reminds us that human beings are brave, but also fragile. Strong, but limited. Capable, but never fully in control. That truth is not meant to scare us away from the wild. It is meant to make us respect it. The hard places deserve that respect. They are beautiful, but they are not soft. They are grand, but they are not kind. They can give peace, but they can also give terror. And yet, there is something noble about entering that kind of world with open eyes. There is something real about testing yourself against cold dawn air, broken terrain, and long silence. There is something ancient in it. Long before roads and screens and noise, human beings lived closer to these rules. They understood weather with their skin. They measured distance with their legs. They felt danger through instinct and observation. Hunting in the hardest wild places brings some of that old reality back. That is why these stories often feel larger than one event. They touch something deep. They remind people of the oldest human lesson of all. Survive what you can, respect what you cannot control, and never forget how powerful the natural world truly is. As the first light rises over a hard landscape, whether it is a line of black pines, a white valley of snow, or a low stretch of marsh under gray sky, a hunter often feels two things at once: excitement and pressure. Excitement because the day has begun. Pressure because once he commits, the land will begin asking its price. The pack feels heavy. The air feels sharp. The world feels huge. Somewhere ahead there may be game. Somewhere ahead there may also be trouble. That double truth is at the heart of every story we are about to enter. The hunt promises reward, but the wilderness demands respect first. And that is where the tension lives. Every hunter wants success, but in the toughest places, success is not only measured by what you bring back. Sometimes success means reading the weather in time. Sometimes it means turning around before the mountain closes in. Sometimes it means finding camp again after a confusing route. Sometimes it means crossing the river safely. Sometimes it means getting through the night. Those are not dramatic ideas to people who have never lived them, but to the ones who have, they mean everything. Because out there, survival is not a side topic. It is always part of the story, even on the best days. Now think about this. A person can train for months, prepare carefully, and still be shocked by how hard the wild feels in real life. Maps do not show the cold on your face. They do not show the way wet gloves make your hands clumsy. They do not show the fear that comes when fresh tracks appear much larger than expected. They do not show how fast daylight disappears under thick trees. They do not show how lonely a ridge feels when wind is the only sound. Real hunting stories matter because they reveal that gap between planning and reality. They show the human side of the experience, the uncertainty, the errors, the moments of doubt, the quiet victories, the close calls. One man may spend hours tracking signs through a snowy timberline, only to realize the storm building over the ridge may trap him before he returns. Another may follow game into deeper forest and suddenly understand he no longer knows exactly where the trail back is. Someone else may wade into marsh ground expecting a short crossing and end up drained, freezing,
and fighting the land with every step. Another may take position above a valley and then hear the sound of something large moving below, something that was never meant to be part of the plan. All these moments begin in the same way. A hunter enters with purpose. The wild answers with its own rules. The stories ahead are powerful because they come from places where comfort disappears early. There is no easy path there, no safe feeling that lasts too long. Even beauty can be a trap.
A snowfield can look clean and calm while hiding deep drifts and bitter wind. A mountain view can look grand and open while masking steep drop-offs and changing weather. A forest can look rich and alive while swallowing sound and hiding movement. A swamp can glow under evening light while covering holes, deep mud, and cold water. In hard country, beauty and danger often stand side by side. That mix is part of what makes the wilderness unforgettable and unforgiving at the same time. And maybe that is why people keep telling these stories. They are not only about fear, they are also about awe. About what it feels like to stand somewhere powerful enough to humble you. About what it means to feel small under a sky that stretches forever. About what it means to know that every step depends on your own judgment. The wild can terrify people, but it can also sharpen them. It can strip away noise and force a person to focus on what matters right now, in this minute, in this breath. Water. Direction, light, ground, wind, warmth, movement, presence. Nothing extra, only what is real. Still, even awe has a dark side when the conditions turn. A place that felt beautiful in the morning can feel hostile by late afternoon. Temperature falls, shadows lengthen, distance grows heavier, the body slows. That is often when trouble starts. Not at the beginning when everyone feels fresh, but later, when small problems have had time to build. Wet clothing, tired legs, hunger, confusion, overconfidence, a missed sign, a delayed return. These are the small cracks where danger enters. In many real hunting stories, the disaster does not begin with one big explosion of chaos. It begins with a quiet mistake that seems harmless at first. That is why the opening of every hard wilderness story matters so much. It is the point where all the conditions are set. The hunter steps forward. The weather stands where it stands. The land waits exactly as it is. The light is moving. Time is passing. Maybe the hunter knows all this clearly. Maybe he only feels it later. But once he is in motion, the story has already begun. The wild is now part of every decision. That is where we are right now, standing at the edge, feeling the air, looking into the trees, the snow, the ridge, the marsh, understanding that beyond this point, every choice will matter more than it does in ordinary life. There are old sayings among people who spend time in harsh country. Never trust the weather too much. Never trust the light too much. Never trust distance too much. Never trust silence too much. Those sayings exist for a reason. Weather changes, light fades, distance lies. Silence can mean many things. Hunters who remember those lessons live longer and return with wiser stories. Hunters who forget them may still return, but they come back changed, more careful, less proud, more aware of how quickly the land can teach a painful lesson. In that way, the wild becomes a teacher too. A harsh one, but a true one. Some people hear that and wonder why anyone would choose this life at all. Why enter brutal places where the cold bites, the ground shifts, the darkness feels thick, and danger can rise with no warning? The answer is not simple. For some, it is tradition. For some, it is food. For some, it is challenge. For some, it is identity. But for many, it is something even harder to explain. It is the feeling that life becomes more honest there. The wild does not flatter you. It does not lie to you. It does not care what image you carry. It shows you exactly what you are when things become hard. That honesty is difficult, but it is also powerful. So as we begin this first section, I want you to carry that feeling with you. Picture the hunter at the edge of the unknown, pack ready, breath visible in the cold, or skin damp in the heat, depending on the land. Ears open. Eyes searching, heart steady but not fully calm. Somewhere in his chest there is excitement. Somewhere else there is caution.
He knows this day may become a story, he just does not know what kind yet. Will it be a story of skill, a story of patience, a story of endurance, or a story of survival? That is the question hanging over every hard hunt. And once the first step is taken, there is no answer yet. The deeper truth behind all great hunting stories is this: the wild is never just a place. It is a force. It shapes mood. It shapes choices. It shapes memory. A person may forget many easy days in life, but he does not forget the day he felt truly tested by snow, darkness, distance, silence, or fear. He does not forget the moment he realized the land had more power than he expected. He does not forget the second he understood that getting home would require more than strength. It would require judgment, calm, and respect. Those are the moments that become stories told for years, stories shared around fires, at tables, in low voices, with long pauses between certain lines because even remembering them brings back the feeling. And the feeling is everything. The sting of cold air, the pull of wet ground, the ache in the legs, the sound of branches in wind, the strange stillness before weather changes, the tightness in the throat when something feels wrong, the lift of hope when direction becomes clear again, the relief of warmth after a brutal stretch. All of that lives inside these tales. That is why the best of them are not just about what happened, but what it felt like when it happened. Real hunting stories from the toughest wild locations. Stay alive because they let us feel that pressure from the inside. So before the true danger arrives, before the close calls become clear, before the biggest shock of all is revealed near the end, this is the world we must enter first. A world of raw distance, of changing skies, of uncertain trails, of great beauty mixed with real threat. A world where the hunter is never as alone as he hopes or as in control as he believes. A world where the land itself watches every step and tests every weakness. That is the world of these stories. That is the ground beneath them. And once you understand that ground, every moment that follows becomes heavier, sharper, and more unforgettable. Because in the hardest wild places on earth, a man may begin his day thinking he is going out to hunt, but somewhere between the first tracks, the falling light, the sudden silence, and the long way back, he may discover a far more frightening truth. Sometimes the real battle is not with the animal at all. Sometimes the real battle is with the wilderness itself, and the wilderness does not care who wins. Stay with me because this is only the beginning, and the deeper we go into these stories, the more intense, more brutal, and more unbelievable they become. The first story begins in a place where the cold could punish a man before he even saw a single animal. It happened in a remote northern wilderness, far from towns, far from cabins, and far from the kind of roads that make people feel safe. A hunter named Caleb had planned the trip for weeks. He was not new to the outdoors. He had hunted before. He knew how to read tracks. He knew how to move quietly. He knew how to carry the right gear. But this trip was different from the start. The area he chose was known for brutal weather, deep snow, and long stretches of silence that could make even an experienced person feel uneasy. That was part of the reason he went.
He wanted a real challenge. He wanted to test himself in a place that still felt wild and untouched. He wanted the kind of hunt that people remembered. What he did not know that morning was that he would remember this trip for a very different reason. He started before sunrise. The air was so cold it hurt his face the moment he stepped out. His breath turned white at once. The snow under his boots gave off that hard, dry crunch that only comes in deep winter. Above him, the sky was still dark, but a thin gray line had started to form on the horizon. The trees stood like black walls on both sides of the valley. Everything looked still. Too still. He adjusted the straps on his pack, checked his rifle, and began walking into the tree line with a steady pace. At first, he felt strong. The cold was sharp, but his body warmed as he moved. He followed a narrow route he had studied on a map and marked in his mind the night before. His goal was to reach a higher section of land where he hoped to find fresh signs of deer moving between shelter and feeding ground. He expected a hard day, but a normal one. Long walk in, careful tracking, slow return before dark. That was the plan. In the early hours, the forest felt almost peaceful.
Snow rested on every branch. The light slowly grew, turning the valley from black to blue, then from blue to pale gray. He noticed rabbit tracks crossing his path, then fox tracks, then the faint sign of deer farther ahead. That was a good sign. He slowed down, lowered his steps, and began watching the ground more closely. He knew this was the moment when the hunt became serious. The forest around him was dense, and the snow was deep enough to hide the shape of the ground. But he stayed focused. His breathing was calm. His movements were clean. He felt in control. About 2 hours into the walk, the valley opened a little, and the wind hit him harder. It came down through the trees and reached through his layers in a way he did not like. He stopped for a moment and pulled his collar higher. He looked up at the sky through the bare branches. It was still clear enough, but there was a washed-out look to the light that made him uneasy. He could not explain it fully. It was just one of those small feelings a person gets in the wild, the kind that does not seem important until later. He kept going. By mid-morning, he had found stronger signs, fresh tracks, clean prints in snow that had not yet hardened. Deer had passed through not long before. He crouched low and studied the direction. They had moved uphill toward thicker cover. He felt a surge of focus now. This was what he came for. He adjusted his route and began climbing a slope lined with old pines. The snow there was deeper, and every step took more effort. His boots sank past the ankle, sometimes deeper. He used tree trunks for balance and moved slowly to avoid making too much sound. The climb lasted longer than he expected. His legs began to ache. His breathing grew heavier. Still, he kept going, telling himself the hard part would be worth it once he reached the upper section. When he finally reached the ridge, the view opened in front of him. The wilderness spread out in every direction. Snow-covered trees, frozen low ground, dark lines of forest, distant hills fading into pale light. It was beautiful in the kind of way that made a man feel small. He stood there for a moment and let himself take it in. No voices, no machines, no signs of people, just cold, silence, and endless land. It was exactly the kind of place he had imagined when planning the trip. But beauty in places like that can be dangerous. It can make a person feel calm when he should stay sharp. Caleb did not fully relax, but he did allow himself a little confidence. That confidence would matter later. He followed the ridgeline for another stretch and found signs that the deer had slowed near a patch of brush below. He moved down carefully, placing his boots where the snow looked more solid. The wind had shifted slightly. He noticed it, but not enough to worry. His eyes kept moving between the ground, the tree gaps, and the low cover ahead. Then he saw movement. Not much, just enough. A shape, brown against white. Then another. There they were. A small group of deer feeding near the edge of thicker timber. He froze at once. His body became still. Even his breathing changed. He waited, studied the line, and began easing himself into a better position. This was the moment hunters imagine over and over before a trip. The quiet buildup, the sighting, the focus, the careful wait. Caleb had a clear line on one animal if it stepped forward a little more. He stayed low, steady, patient. For a few seconds, nothing else in the world existed. Just the target, the cold air, and the space between them. But then something changed. A wind gust came from the wrong side, sharp, sudden, not a normal breeze. It carried his scent fast and clean into the group. The deer reacted at once. Heads up, bodies tense. Then they were gone. Just like that. White snow breaking under fast legs, brown shapes vanishing between the trees. In less than 3 seconds, the whole chance was gone. Caleb stayed still another moment, annoyed but calm. That was hunting. It happened. A chance can disappear in the blink of an eye. He exhaled slowly and rose just enough to stretch his legs. He told himself he would circle wide and see if the group slowed farther ahead. It was not ideal, but the day was still young. He still had time. He still had strength. He still believed he could turn the morning around. That was the first mistake. Not a huge mistake, not a foolish one on its face, but the first one. He chose to push deeper instead of pausing to think longer about the wind and the changing sky.
He told himself he only needed another hour, maybe 2. Then he would turn back. He began moving along the ridge again, but now the forest ahead looked thicker, and the ground below dropped more sharply in places. He adjusted as he went, step by step, tree to tree, snow to brush. He kept tracking fragments of sign, enough to stay hopeful, but not enough to feel certain. By noon, the weather had changed more than he expected. Clouds moved in from the west and flattened the light. The bright snow stopped looking bright. Shadows faded. The world turned dull and gray. That kind of light is dangerous in winter because it hides shape. Dips in ground become harder to see. Distance looks different. A slope can appear flatter than it is. Caleb knew that. He had seen it before. But he also believed he knew his way back. He checked his position against the ridge and kept moving. After another stretch, he noticed the tracks were older now. The strong sign was gone. What remained was broken and uncertain. He stopped and listened. Wind in the upper branches, nothing else. The cold had begun to settle deeper into his gloves. He flexed his fingers. He thought about turning back, he really did. But then he saw another line of movement in the snow below, farther east, fresh enough to keep him interested. He hesitated only a few seconds, then angled after it. The drop into the lower trees was harder than it looked. Snow collected deep between roots and fallen branches. Twice he sank to the knee. Once he caught himself on a trunk just before slipping forward. His pace slowed badly. Still, he followed the prints. They led through a narrow stand of trees and into a more open, low section, where the wind had blown the snow into uneven ridges. By now, the day felt colder, darker, and less friendly than it had earlier. He noticed that too. The excitement of the hunt was fading. In its place came the quiet pressure that grows when a person realizes he has gone farther than planned and the return may not be as simple as he hoped. He checked the time. Later than he liked. Not late yet, but no longer early. He looked around and tried to line up the direction back toward the ridge. That was the moment he first felt something he did not want to feel. Uncertainty. Not panic, not full confusion, just a slight break in confidence. The trees in this section looked too similar. The low light was flattening everything. The tracks he followed were no longer taking him where he wanted to go. He told himself not to overreact. He had a general sense of direction. He had enough daylight to correct. He could work uphill again and reconnect with the ridgeline. That was reasonable. But the trouble with uncertainty in winter wilderness is that it grows fast when the land does not cooperate. He started climbing back, only to find the slope steeper than expected. The snow was loose in places and crusted in others. His boots slipped. He adjusted and tried another angle. More trees, more hidden holes under the snow. Every minute now cost effort. His breathing became louder. Sweat began forming under his layers, which in that cold could become dangerous later. He stopped, opened part of his jacket to vent heat, then started again. Still, the ridge did not appear where he expected it. He looked left, then right. Nothing looked clearly familiar. The forest had lost its shape. What had seemed simple earlier now looked like an endless series of white rises and dark trunks. That was when he finally admitted to himself that he was off course. He stood very still and let that truth settle. Off course in a winter forest is not the same as lost forever, but it is serious. It changes your thinking at once. The mind begins asking harder questions. How far off? How much daylight remains? How much energy have I already spent? Is the weather getting worse? What is the fastest, safe way back? The worst thing a person can do in that moment is rush blindly. Caleb knew that. He forced himself to calm down. He took a drink. He checked his pockets. He looked at the slope, the tree spacing, the direction of wind. He worked through what he knew. He had come from higher ground. The valley and route back should be west and slightly south, if his sense remained right. He chose a line and started moving with more purpose now, no longer hunting, only trying to get back. For a while it seemed to work. The land began rising again. He crossed older tracks, maybe his own, though he could not be sure. The clouds thickened further. Light dropped another level. Snow started falling, light at first, just a soft drift through branches. Caleb looked up and felt his stomach tighten.
snow now was bad news.
Even a light fall could soften signs, blur tracks, and change the forest enough to make retracing steps much harder. He increased his pace. The problem was that pace now cost energy he had already spent. His legs were heavy from the deep snow. His shoulders ached from tension. His hands felt thick inside the gloves. He kept moving, but the easy strength from morning was gone. That is the other thing people forget about survival stories. Trouble rarely begins when a person is strong and fresh. It begins after hours of effort, when the body is worn down and clear thinking takes more work. Caleb was entering that stage now. Then he made the second mistake. He saw what looked like a narrow opening between two tree lines and assumed it would cut him back toward the ridge faster. It was tempting. The slope there seemed smoother, easier, more direct. He took it. Within minutes, the ground beneath the snow changed. He stepped into a hidden dip and plunged one leg nearly to the thigh. The shock of it was instant. Cold snow packed into the side of his boot and around his lower pants. He caught himself with both hands and pulled hard to get free. It took more effort than he liked. When he stood again, his breathing was sharp and fast. Worse, one glove had filled with loose snow at the wrist. He cursed under his breath, shook it out, and forced himself to move again. But now cold had a better opening into his body. The snowfall thickened. Not a blizzard, not yet. But enough to make the trees ahead look hazy. Enough to soften edges. Enough to make the air feel closed. Caleb tried to keep his mind narrow and practical. West, uphill, ridge, then back down toward the marked route. Simple. But the forest would not stay simple. One rise led to another. One stand of pines opened into another patch of tangled brush. He found no clear line, no strong feature, no solid proof he was correcting properly. Minutes passed, then more. His confidence kept draining. The first true wave of fear hit him when he checked the light and realized how much day he had already lost. It was not dark yet, but winter evenings in dense timber come fast. He knew that too well. He also knew the temperature would drop hard once the light went. Moving in deep snow, tired, partly wet, off course, and colder by the minute was the kind of chain that could become deadly if it lasted too long. He stopped again and listened, hoping for something useful. Nothing but wind and light snow. No sound of water, no sound of open valley, no sound that told him where he was. For the first time that day, he imagined spending the night out there without meaning to. That thought changed everything. Until then, the problem had still felt correctable inside the day. Now he had to face another possibility. If he could not find the route back before full dark, what then? Could he make a shelter? Yes, maybe. Could he stay warm enough? Maybe not. He had gear, but not enough for comfort in deep winter away from camp. Could he keep moving in the dark? Dangerous. Very dangerous in that terrain. The best option was still to find the way out before night. He knew that. He also knew panic would kill his chances. So he did the hardest thing. He slowed down. He forced his mind to stop racing and think in order. He studied the wind again. It had shifted since morning, but not fully. He tried to remember how it had struck his face on the ridge earlier. He pictured the slope where he first saw the deer. He pictured the valley opening. He pictured the angle of light. It was not much, but it was something. He chose a more careful line now, moving uphill while scanning for any sign of the ridge crest. The snow came steadier, but still light enough that he could see about 20 yards clearly. Beyond that, the world looked thin and dull. Then he saw tracks. Not deer this time, large, fresh, deep in the snow. He froze and stared. They crossed the line ahead from left to right, disappearing into brush. Wolf, he thought first. Then he looked again. No, too big, too round. He crouched lower, studying the shape. Bear? That made no sense. Too cold for normal movement. He checked again, pulse suddenly high. Then the truth hit him. Moose. A large moose. Relief came first, then another worry right behind it. Moose in winter can be dangerous, especially if surprised, stressed, or boxed into tight cover. He did not want that problem right now. He backed off slightly and moved wide around the track line, slower than before.
The fact that another large animal was moving through the same section reminded him how small his place in the forest really was. He was no longer the focused hunter from morning. He was a tired man in deep snow, fighting cold, chasing direction, and now thinking about what other life might be nearby. That is how the wild shifts power. Quietly, little by little,
A man enters believing he is the one doing the tracking. Then, at some point, he realizes he is just another body moving through a much bigger system. The light dropped harder. That flat gray winter light began turning blue. The kind of blue that means the day is almost over. Caleb's legs felt slow now. His back hurt. His partly wet lower pant leg had begun to stiffen with cold. He kept flexing his toes inside the boot, trying to keep feeling there. He was still moving, but the forest seemed endless. Then, just when he was close to slipping into real despair, he noticed something different ahead. The trees thinned slightly. The ground rose in a cleaner line. A stronger wind moved across the upper section. Ridge, he thought. Maybe. He pushed toward it. The climb hurt. Every step felt like dragging weight behind him, but the shape ahead became clearer. Then he reached it. Not the exact spot he had used earlier, but part of the same long ridge system. He knew it at once from the way the land dropped on the far side. Relief hit so hard it almost made him weak. He stood there breathing hard, staring into the dim valley below. He was not safe yet, not even close, but he had a major piece back. He now had direction. That should have been the end of the trouble. In a simpler story, it would have been. But hard wilderness often saves one problem only to offer another. The wind over the ridge was much stronger now. It blasted across open snow and drove loose flakes into his face. The temperature had clearly fallen. The little moisture he carried from sweat and snow felt twice as cold. The route down toward his original line was longer than he hoped because he had rejoined the ridge farther north. He had to move along at first, then angle down through timber before full dark closed in. He knew he could do it if he stayed steady, but he also knew his body was near the edge of useful strength. He began moving fast but carefully, using what remained of the light. The snow on the ridge was wind-cut and uneven. In some places it held him well. In others it broke underfoot. Twice he almost rolled an ankle. He caught himself each time and kept going. The cold now felt different. It was no longer the sharp, clean cold of morning. It was heavier, more dangerous. It sat deeper in his clothes and reached him even while moving. He felt it in the fingers first, then in his cheeks, then in the strange stiffness that began settling into his shoulders and jaw. He talked to himself at times, short, simple words. Keep going. Stay straight. Do not rush. Watch the ground. That kind of self-talk may sound strange to people who have never been alone in the wild, but it matters. It keeps the mind organized. It fights the slow spread of panic. It reminds a tired person that he is still choosing. Caleb did that now, step after step, trying to keep his focus from breaking apart. At last, he found the angle where the ridge dropped toward the valley he recognized. He started down through thicker trees again, using trunks to control his pace. Darkness was rising from the forest floor now. The sky still held some cold light, but under the branches it was fading fast. He knew he had maybe 30 minutes of usable vision, maybe less. Then he saw something that almost made him laugh from relief. A broken branch sticking at a strange angle beside a narrow opening. He had noticed it earlier in the day, not because it was important, but because it looked like an arm pointing downhill. That small memory told him he was close to his route. Very close. He moved faster and found more signs. His own boot prints. Faint, partly softened by the new snow, but still there. He bent and touched one with his glove just to be sure. It was real. It was his. He had found the line back. What followed was not easy, but it was simple. He put one boot into the next old print when he could, saving energy and staying on known ground. The forest grew darker. The snowfall continued lightly. The valley wind returned. But now every step had direction and purpose. The fear inside him changed shape. It was still there, but now it carried a thin thread of hope. That thread matters more than many people understand. Once a person believes escape is real again, the body often gives a little more. Still, he was not safe yet.
His legs cramped once on the lower slope. He stopped and stretched through pain. He nearly tripped over a buried branch. He struggled to keep his toes warm. At one point, he felt a wave of exhaustion so strong he wanted to sit down just for a minute. That is another dangerous moment in cold wilderness. Sitting feels easy. Rest feels deserved. But in deep cold, rest at the wrong time can begin a losing chain. Caleb knew that too. He kept moving.
By the time he reached the outer edge of the valley, true night was settling in. Not full black yet, but close. The distant shape of his vehicle was not visible, but he knew the route. He crossed the last open section with the wind in his face and his shoulders bent. His body was shaking now from a mix of cold, fatigue, and leftover fear. When he finally saw the dark shape of the truck through trees, he felt something almost bigger than relief. Gratitude. Pure, heavy gratitude. He reached the door, fumbled the handle with stiff fingers, and climbed inside. At first, he just sat there, breathing hard, not starting the engine yet. The cab was freezing, but even that felt safe compared to the forest outside. He dropped his head back and stared through the windshield into the dark. Snow moved across the glass. His hands trembled. His legs felt hollow. The whole day replayed in pieces. The deer, the wrong wind, the deeper push, the lost direction, the falling light, the ridge, the return. He had made it out, but he also knew how close the day had come to becoming something much worse. Later, when he told the story, people asked the question they always ask. Were you really lost? He would pause before answering because people hear that word in a simple way. Lost sounds clean when said in a warm room. Out there, it does not feel clean at all. Out there, lost can begin as only a crack in confidence. Then it grows into uncertainty. Then it grows into bad choices if you let it. He would usually answer the same way. I was not lost beyond hope, but I was far enough off, cold enough, and late enough that it could have gone bad very fast. That is what makes the story important. Not just that he came back, but how close he came to not controlling the day anymore. He had entered the wilderness as the hunter. He knew the map. He knew the plan. He had the right goal in mind. But the wild did what it always does in hard places. It changed the terms. It used weather, light, distance, and fatigue to slowly strip away his control. It did not attack all at once. It pressed him little by little until one missed choice became another, then another, until survival became the main task. That is how many real wilderness stories unfold. Quietly at first, then all at once. Caleb later said the most frightening part was not the cold, not even the moment he knew he was off course. The most frightening part was realizing how normal the day had felt at the start. That was what stayed with him. Trouble had not announced itself. There had been no huge warning, no dramatic signal. Just one decision to go a little farther, one belief that there was still enough time, one guess that the route would be easy to reconnect. That is what danger in harsh country often looks like. Not madness, not obvious foolishness, just a few ordinary choices that grow sharp under hard conditions. He also said something else that mattered. He had hunted before that trip, and he hunted after it too. But he was never again casual about winter ground, fading light, or shifting weather. The trip changed him. It made him slower in a good way, more respectful, less eager to chase a chance at the cost of safe return. That is the hidden lesson inside many real hunting stories. The wild teaches hard, but if a person listens and survives, the lesson lasts. And that is why this first story belongs here. Because it shows how the toughest wild places do not always need a charging predator or a dramatic attack to become deadly. Sometimes all they need is cold, snow, fatigue, and one person who goes a little farther than planned. Sometimes the scariest enemy is not an animal at all. It is the slow way a forest in winter can close around a man until direction fades, light falls, and every step becomes a question. When Caleb left home that morning, he thought he was going hunting in a frozen wilderness. By nightfall, he understood something much deeper. In a place like that, hunting is never only about finding game. It is also about knowing when to stop, when to turn, and when the land has started asking for more than you can safely give.
That day, he came back with no animal, no trophy, and no victory in the way most people imagine one. But he came back with something more valuable. He came back with the kind of respect that only the wild can teach, and he came back with a story that proved just how thin the line can be between a hard hunt and a fight to get home alive. And the truth is, that line only gets thinner in the next story. Because if the frozen wilderness tested the body with cold and distance, the next location tested the mind in a very different way. It was darker, thicker, stranger. The kind of place where people say the trees themselves begin to feel like they are watching you.
The kind of place where sound does not travel the way it should. The kind of place where a hunter can start the day feeling steady and end it wondering whether something has been following him for hours. The next story took place in a forest so thick and so old that even people from nearby towns spoke about it with caution. It was the kind of place where light struggled to reach the ground, where tall trees stood close together like dark walls, and where every path seemed to lead into another path until a man could no longer say with full confidence where he had started. The hunter in this story was named Aaron. He had grown up around woods. He knew trails. He knew how to stay quiet. He knew how to read small signs most people would never notice. But this forest was different. It had a reputation. Not because of ghosts or legends, though people told those stories too. It had a reputation because it played with a person's senses. Sound moved strangely there. Distance looked wrong. The trees all seemed to repeat themselves. And when the wind died, the silence felt so heavy that even calm people began to feel watched. Aaron did not care much about stories. He cared about facts. The facts were simple. The area held good game. It had not been hunted hard that season. The weather was cool but not brutal. The ground would be wet in places but manageable. He planned a full day in and out. Nothing reckless. Nothing dramatic. He packed carefully, carried enough food and water, checked his gear, and left before sunrise. The sky that morning was covered in low cloud. Not storm clouds, just a gray lid over the day. The air smelled like damp bark and cold earth. He parked near an old logging road and stood for a moment listening before he entered the trees. There was no bird song yet, no vehicle sound in the distance, just the faint movement of wind high above. Then even that faded. He started along a narrow trail that was barely a trail at all.
A line of less thick brush, a few broken branches, a soft place in the leaves where boots had passed before. It was enough. He moved slowly, letting his eyes adjust to the dark under the canopy. The deeper he went, the more the outside world seemed to close behind him. That is something people who do not spend time in real forests do not always understand. A deep forest does not just surround you, it absorbs you. Every step in makes the last open space feel farther away. Every line of trees behind you looks like the one before it. The air changes. The smell changes. Even your thinking changes a little. At first, the morning felt normal. Aaron saw old hoof marks in soft ground. He saw places where deer had brushed through low growth. He noticed fresh droppings near a fallen log. Good signs. Useful signs. The kind that told him the area was alive. He moved with patience, checking the ground, then the space ahead, then the sides. His breathing stayed even. His shoulders stayed loose. He was careful not to step on wet sticks that might snap. He had done this kind of slow movement many times before. He trusted it. The forest floor was thick with damp leaves, roots, moss, and rotting wood. In some sections, the ground gave slightly under each step. In others, it was firm but uneven. Tall trunks rose on every side, many of them straight and close together. Here and there, twisted branches reached low like arms. The farther he went, the less daylight seemed to matter. Though morning was advancing, the woods stayed dim. Gray light slipped down in narrow strips, but much of the ground remained dark and flat. It was the sort of place where shapes could fool the eyes if a person became lazy. Aaron did not become lazy, but after a while, even careful people feel the pressure of repetition. Around mid-morning, he crossed a shallow stream and found stronger signs. Deer had passed not long before. He knelt and studied a patch of disturbed mud. Fresh enough to matter. He followed the line into thicker growth, moving sideways through a narrow lane between thorny brush and young trees. The forest there felt tighter. The air was still. Sounds seemed to stop just beyond a short distance. It was not exactly silent, but the few sounds that existed felt close and trapped. A drop of water from a branch, the faint rub of cloth when he shifted, the small press of his boot through leaf mold. Nothing traveled far. Nothing opened up. That was when he first heard it. A crack. Not loud, not dramatic. Just the clean sound of a branch or stick breaking somewhere behind him. He stopped at once and turned his head slightly without moving the rest of his body. He listened. Nothing. No second sound. No movement. No birds reacting. No rush and brush. He waited maybe 15 seconds, maybe 30. In deep woods, time stretches when a person is listening. Then he slowly turned farther and scanned behind him. Trees, brush, gray light, no motion. He told himself the obvious thing. Could have been old wood settling. Could have been a small animal. Could have been anything. He faced forward again and kept going. That should have been the end of it. In many places it would have been. But this forest had a way of taking small things and making them stay in the mind. Aaron walked another 10 minutes, maybe more. He rounded a fallen cedar. He crossed a patch of wet ground and stepped onto firmer soil. Then he heard it again. Another crack. This time farther left. Or maybe not. In thick forest, direction can be hard to judge. Sound hits trunks and returns oddly. He stopped again. This time his heart rose faster. Not panic, just alertness. He listened longer. Still nothing. He lowered himself slowly near a tree and waited. If something large was moving, it might move again. If it was deer, he might catch sight of them. If it was another hunter, he might hear a step or voice. But no voice came. No animal shape passed through the trees, just the same still air. Aaron stayed crouched for nearly 2 minutes, then rose and continued, though his pace had changed. It was slower now, more deliberate. He looked back more often. He began noticing things he had not cared about before. How the trees stood in nearly even lines in some parts. How the brush formed small hidden spaces between trunks. How easy it would be for something to stand still and remain unseen. None of that meant danger. It only meant the forest had entered his thinking more deeply than before. He reached a more open section near a cluster of massive old trees with roots like walls. The ground there was softer, darker, and less crowded with brush. Better visibility, but only for a little distance. He decided to stop for water and take a longer look around. He unscrewed the cap, drank, and listened again while swallowing. That is when he realized something that bothered him more than the branch cracks. There were almost no birds. A forest that size should have held more life and sound, even on a gray morning. But the deeper section he had entered felt strangely empty. Maybe it was only the weather. Maybe the time of day. Maybe the heavy canopy. He knew there were reasons. Still, it pressed on him. Human beings are not meant to ignore silence that deep. Silence like that activates something old in the mind. He moved on and soon found a line of hoof marks leading between two huge trunks into a narrow decline. He followed, stepping carefully down through wet leaves. The ground there sloped into a small basin thick with ferns and low growth. It looked like a place animals might use for cover. He slowed even more, keeping a tree between himself and the open side. His focus tightened. This could be it, he thought. This could be the section where patience paid off. Then came the third sound. Not a crack this time. A footstep. Soft. Heavy enough to be real. Behind him. Close enough that his body reacted before his mind finished processing it. He turned sharply. Nothing. Only the basin behind him. A few slick roots, tall trunks, dark brush. No shape, no movement, no obvious cause. But this time the feeling was different. He did not tell himself it was just settling wood. He had heard too many real steps in the woods before. This had felt like weight on ground. Controlled weight. He waited longer now. Full minute. Maybe more. His hand shifted position on his rifle. He scanned low, then high, then wide. He listened until the silence itself felt like pressure in his ears. Still nothing. If someone was out there, they were not moving now. If it was an animal, it was hidden well. He knew better than to spin himself into fear without proof, but proof is not always easy to get in a place built to hide things. He moved again, though now he no longer felt like the only aware creature in the forest. That feeling matters.
Once it enters, everything changes. A hunter who feels alone moves one way. A hunter who feels observed moves another. Aaron took shorter steps. He paused more often. He stopped looking only for game and started reading the woods for intention. Broken fern, bent stem, fresh scuff in leaves. Anything that might tell him what was there with him. But the forest gave him almost nothing. That made it worse. A clear sign would have helped. A clear sign could be handled. Unclear presence is harder on the mind. By late morning, he had gone deeper than he first planned, though not by a reckless amount. He still knew generally where he was in relation to the stream and the old road. But the land had begun folding in strange ways. Small rises hid the view. Thick stands forced him to angle around. Fallen trees blocked direct lines. Every adjustment was small by itself, but together they made the route less clean in memory. He noticed that too. It did not frighten him yet, but it sharpened his need to stay aware. The fourth sound came when he was stepping over a moss-covered log. Another footstep, then a second. Not rushed, not crashing, slow. He froze with one leg half over the log. For a second, he did not move at all. His body felt locked between action and stillness. Then he slowly finished the step, lowered his boot without sound, and turned in one controlled motion. Still nothing. Now his pulse hit hard enough that he could feel it in his neck. He studied the trees one by one. Any dark shape, any line that did not match the others, any small sway. Nothing. The basin behind him looked empty again. But empty is not the same as safe. He knew that with full certainty now. Something in him had crossed a line. He no longer doubted the feeling. Whether it was a person, an animal, or some strange trick of sound and tension, he was not moving through the forest with ease anymore. He was moving through it under pressure. He thought about calling out. Just one sharp human sound. If another hunter was nearby, that could solve it fast. But he did not do it. Why? Later, when he told the story, he said he did not want to destroy the hunt if it turned out to be nothing. He also said something else. Deep down, he was not sure he wanted an answer. That sounds strange, but in that moment it made sense. Uncertainty can feel safer than confirmation when the confirmation might be bad. He chose a different direction then. Not directly back, but wider, angling toward a more open section of forest he had noticed on the map. His plan was simple. Change terrain, improve visibility, reduce the feeling of being boxed in. If he was imagining things, the open ground would settle him. If he was not imagining things, the open ground would make movement easier to read. It was a smart choice. But the forest did not become easier right away. It became stranger. The trees there were taller and more spread out, but the undergrowth thickened in twisted patches. Dead vines hung between trunks. Wind had still not returned. The air felt stuck. Aaron moved slowly through this new section, expecting at any moment to see a deer step out or a hunter in orange stand up, or a large animal move off. None of that happened. Instead, he found a place where the leaves behind him looked disturbed, as if something had walked where he had walked. Not exactly on his track, but near it. He knelt, stared, and frowned. The ground was too messy to read with certainty. A person in that state of mind can easily overread signs. He knew that. But he also knew what bothered him. The marks seemed